Hello, my Arkansas Junior High oboists. I'm looking forward to going through set 2 of the All-Region audition excerpts and give you some insight onto how you can properly prepare so that you feel great at your audition. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's begin with our scale in thirds and our arpeggio that are both in D minor. I really enjoy playing in D minor, but there is something to talk about, and that is how are we going to play our F fingerings in here. We have lots of F, and you'll notice on the scale in thirds, we do have an F written right above that second note. And the same goes for the arpeggio as well. And that is actually indicating to play a forked F. But there is one other option that many of you have, and you will actually be much more successful if you use that fingering. So let's just refresh our F fingerings, and we'll start with what I call normal, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and this little key right here. Now this fingering can't be used in either of these because to go from D to F, we would have to slide. So we can already eliminate that. Another option that all of you have is what we call our forked F. And that fingering, 1, 2, 3, 1, and 3, is very easy to play D to F. But when we get to the third note, which is an E, so D, F, E, we may get a blip going between these two notes. So the best option, yet not all instruments, not all oboes will have this, is what we call the left F. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and this little pinky key right there. That will make things much easier and much smoother to go from D to F to E. So if you have that left F key, make sure you use that throughout both of these because it's going to make you play this so much more beautifully, and it will actually save you a lot of time because you don't have to work on getting that blip between the F and the E to disappear. Something else that's very good to talk about with these two is that you start on a low D. We all know that starting on low notes on the oboe can be scary, but I'll point you to the fact that there is no dynamics, which means you can play as loud as you need to get that note out. To also help you get these first notes out, make sure that you are very open with that embouchure. Drop that jaw so that you can send tons of air through the instrument. That is really going to help you to get those first couple notes and get started so that you don't have these kind of false starts that we normally have when we're playing these low notes. Something else that I will bring up is these two notes right here. This is kind of the top of your range right now, and we want to make sure that you're playing the right fingerings. It's very common to end up not playing the right fingerings with these and just kind of guessing and hoping it's the right note. So let's refresh. I'm going to give you actually a C-sharp fingering that you won't find in your books, but it makes this note sparkle. So this C-sharp fingering that I use is side or second octave key, 2, 3, 1, 2, and your C key. That is going to really bring out that beautiful sound on the C-sharp. Your D fingering also may differ from what you've seen in your method book. Half hole, 2, 3, 2, and your C key. That's very similar to that C-sharp. You're just moving your index fingers really to go between the two, and it's really going to make things sparkle. The last thing that I'll bring up with these two excerpts is that you really want to do a lot of slow practice. As you get more comfortable with playing these, you will naturally start to speed up, and everything will seem very regulated, I guess is a good way to put that. So make sure that you do slow practice as you begin, and when you're doing that, blow through each note. You want to make sure that each note is touching, that there's no gap in between the two, so that when you play faster, it will sound like you are just singing, and the sound is just constant. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and play the two of these so you can get an idea of what they sound like. The next etude that we're going to work on is titled Allegro rustico. And this is the first thing I want to talk about. So when you're looking at this, you see that it's got this ALL and this tiny O. So this is just a older way of abbreviating the word Allegro. And this Allegro rustico is a tempo marking. And so it's very important when you are going through these etudes to make sure that you know what all of the words and terms and symbols mean, so that you can play it as accurately as you possibly can. So Allegro, I will remind you, because you probably know, is a faster tempo. So we want to make sure that we're on the faster side when we play this. But rustico is probably a word that seems sort of familiar. It's not English, but we can kind of guess what it might mean. And if you're thinking it means rustic, you're absolutely right. And so when you think about rustic, you don't think of something that is very, very fast. So this Allegro rustico means that it is Allegro, so it does have a little bit of a fast quality, but it's on the slower side of that fast tempo. So beyond that, we also want to look at, for instance, our time signature, which is 6/8. And 6/8 can mean a lot of things, but in a faster tempo like this, it means that there is going to be 2 beats per measure. And each beat is going to encompass 3 eighth notes. So when you are playing this, you want to think about your big beat being 3 eighth notes as opposed to 2 eighth notes in something like 4/4. So if I'm looking at the beginning of this, I'm thinking da 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 da. And knowing this is going to help myself be able to get the character of that Allegro rustico much, much better for us. The other thing that is really important just to take note of is there's tons and tons of staccatos throughout this. Now, the oboe can play staccato really well, sometimes so well that when staccato is actually written in the music, we play it way too short. We do something like this. That's way too short. So make sure to err on the longer side. You don't want it to be like a tenuto and super legato and beautiful, but it needs to have just a little bit of shortness so that we get that idea as we play. So the next thing I want to talk about is phrasing. So anytime we are playing anything, we want to make sure that we're making phrases, that we're making it sound like we are talking or playing in full sentences. So it's actually pretty clear through most of this where the phrases are. So for instance, at the very beginning, we have da 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 dum ba dum ba dum. That's our first phrase. And then we repeat it up a step. So we go from B flat and then it goes to C. So if I mark those, you'll see phrase 1, phrase 2, and then as we continue, we have these breath marks that kind of help us see where we are phrasing. So there's another one. And then we lose our breath marks. So this is where we have to really pay attention. So at that mezzo forte, da 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 dum, bum ba da da dum, bum 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 ba dum. That is the end of that phrase. So then we start at the end of this measure, bum 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 ba da 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 da. So when we get to this quarter note F, this is going to show us another phrase marking. And then we have these little figures. These are essentially transition. They're not really phrases, they're just little motivic things. And then we have, after that, also transitional, because where we have this breath mark right here, we are back at the beginning. So we should be very familiar with all of this. So we follow again our breath marks. Here's the end of a phrase, and here's the end of another phrase. So then we have this right here, which we should all be familiar with as a repeat. And it's very clear where our phrase is here as well, going all the way again to the breath mark in that first ending. And then we go, once we get to the second ending, all the way to the end. That is going to help us play this a lot better, because if we think of each of these phrases as sentences, we can have our complete thought each time, so everything belongs together. So I'll go ahead and play this for you so you have an idea of what this sounds like. So we've arrived at one of the more technical etudes that you have in this set. And I will bring first your attention actually to the key signature, which you can see has 2 sharps. And if you know your key signatures, you know that D major is the key signature for 2 sharps. However, notice that D doesn't really show up much in here. You'll notice that our first note is F sharp. And then the next note that we repeat a lot is B. And then if you fast forward your eyes to the last 3 measures, you'll see that you have all 3 octaves of B. So this is actually in B minor. And you may say, why does this matter? Well, we want to always know what key we're in, but also know what notes are important. And in any key, the name of the key is the most important note. So once we get to measure 2, you'll see all of beat 2 are Bs. And again, those last 3 measures, Bs. F sharp is arguably maybe the second most important note. And that's what we start on. So just being aware that these are important is very helpful to you. It's also important to just be aware of this because you have in that second line lots of accidentals. You have an A sharp and you have an E sharp. Those are very, very important just to know what their function are. The A sharp is that half step below your B. So it's what we like to call a leading tone. The E sharp is actually an F, right? So it is a half step below your F sharp. So it is, in essence, a leading tone to your F sharp. And so it will help you play this a little bit better if you know those functions. I want you to take note that there is no tempo marking, which means you can play this at a tempo that's comfortable for you. Don't feel that you need to play this super fast just because it's all 16th notes. No. Play it at a tempo that is comfortable for you, because if you play it very clean and slower, it's going to actually sound faster than if you try and play it fast and have all kinds of mess ups. So get that metronome out, play it with that metronome so that you can play at a very steady tempo. And as you learn it more, you will get faster. Some other things that we've already talked about in the other etudes, but I'll bring up again. Pay attention to those staccatos. You don't want them to be too short because you don't want to be pecky like a chicken. Nice and bouncy is a better way to think about them so that you don't get this very dry sound. Also, watch that your embouchure doesn't close too much. Keep it open so that when you're going into that upper range, A or above, that you don't close the sound off and make yourself go sharp. So that's very, very important to pay attention to. I also want to bring your attention, I've already kind of talked about it, to this measure right there. There are a lot of accidentals in here. This is a measure that you are going to want to practice a lot. And I don't mean just playing the measure over and over and over. There's a couple ways that you can really work on this. So one of them I call backwards practicing. So I'm going to start on the very last note of that measure, which is an E sharp, and I'm going to go to the downbeat of the next measure. That should be pretty easy for us. And then I'm going to add in our D sharp. And I'm going to do that all the way until I get to the very beginning of the measure. That's going to kind of trick my brain into making this work a lot easier. The other thing that I would do is change the rhythm. So right now it's straight 16th notes. But what if I make it a dotted 8th 16th? So it would sound play that lots and lots of times through. And notice I'm going very slowly. It doesn't need to be fast. This is just to kind of trick your brain into being able to play this. Then you can flip it. So 16th followed by a dotted 8th. So it would sound like this. Do that a lot of times, and it's going to get a lot easier. And then I'll give you 2 more rhythms. So this is a grouping of 4. So we're going to make the first note an 8th note, and then we're going to make the next 3 be a triplet, and this would be a 16th note triplet. So it would sound like this. So you can see it makes those next 3 much, much quicker. Then we're gonna flip that, so triplet and then an 8th note. So playing through all these rhythms is going to help a lot. So I would make sure to do that as much as you can, because again, this is probably the hardest measure out of all of this. If I bring your attention to the last 3 measures again, you have these grace notes. And it's really easy to play these last 3 measures like this. But we want to connect these. So I know that that last note in the second and third to last bar are 8th notes, but think of them longer. Okay? And that last note, that low B, you really have to drop that jaw and send as much air as possible so that you can play that final note. So let me play this one for you so you get an idea of what this sounds like. Okay, so we have made it to our final etude, but this is actually not an etude at all. You'll see it says that it's the Sarabande from Concerto in G minor by Handel. And Handel was a Baroque composer who wrote lots of wonderful things. And this, as mentioned, comes from a concerto. Concerto was something usually written for a solo instrument. In this case, it was the oboe, and this was the slow movement in this concerto. The Sarabande is a slow Spanish dance that's usually in 3. And you'll notice if you look at our time signature, we are in 3/4. And just above that time signature, we see the word Largo. Now, Largo is actually a slow tempo marking. And it is very slow. So we don't want to play this too fast. We see that it's lots of these long note values, but this is meant to be very, very slow. This is going to be a very beautiful and lyrical solo that we're going to play, as opposed to the other technical ones that we did. So the really important thing to talk through on this, which we've already talked about a little bit in others, is the phrasing. So to make this really make sense to our listener, we need to make sure we know where those sentences are. So you'll notice there's a motive at the beginning. And then if you fast forward to measure 5, you'll see that again. Which should kind of alert our heads to the fact that that's probably another phrase. But it isn't the beginning of a phrase. Those 8th notes before is actually where it starts. So if I diagram our first phrase, it goes from the beginning to that C, and then we pick up here and continue all the way to that double bar. Now, if you look at the next bit of music, it's actually exactly the same as those first two phrases. So we have two more phrases in that, and then we come to a repeated section. So we want to make sure to pay attention to that repeated section, but we also want to figure out the phrasing here as well. So we've got a similar motive on different notes. It's the same rhythm though. And we have a sharp, but we're in a flat key. So that's something that our brain should say, uh-oh, something's going on. And so this is the end of the phrase here. And then we repeat this motive, but instead of going up at the end, we go down. Right? And then we have to figure out the end of this phrase. And this is kind of what I like to call an elision. So it does kind of end here, and we have this that kind of continues, but they also kind of belong together. So I may not take a breath there, but I also know that I'm kind of beginning a new idea within the same idea. One other thing to bring up is all of the dynamics. So we start at piano, and then we do have a forte in that second line, and then we go back to piano when we repeat those first two phrases, and a little bit more of a crescendo to this forte, but it's really all the same. But we want to make each of these sections different. So if you begin that first one at piano, I might bump up this to a mezzo piano, maybe a fortissimo. And while it seems like, oh gosh, I'm changing what's actually written, it makes it more interesting for the audience. And I can tell you they're not gonna mind if you bump those dynamics up a little bit to make it more interesting. Notice after our repeat, we have a mezzo forte dynamic. So this section should feel a little bit louder and maybe a little bit more declaratory in contrast to that opening. And then we do have a decrescendo to a mezzo forte, so that tells us that middle stuff might be more of a forte. And then we do have a decrescendo to the last note, and that, I think, again, somewhere in mezzo land, so mezzo forte, mezzo piano, so that we're not too soft to end. The last thing that I will bring up is I mentioned that Handel is a Baroque composer. And what was very common in the Baroque era was to add ornaments that wasn't actually written in the music. The musicians at that time were very used to this happening and being able to play these ornaments and add the ornaments without them being written. And so there's some common ones that a musician would add just instinctively, and those are trills. So there are a couple places I would add a trill. One would be here, and then of course this is the same thing, just written out repeat. And then I would add one more, and that is right at the end where I would do a trill. So quick story about trills of how to play them. It's not like band where you just have a trill written and you just move your finger to the note above and come back to that note really, really quickly. There's a little bit more to this. For instance, that first trill, we have a written F before it going to that E natural. And we're going to start this trill on the E and go back up to the F. So it'll sound like this. I tend to use my left F pinky key to trill. You don't have to. You could easily trill with the normal. That's just my personal preference. So that second trill that I wrote in there, of course, will be the same because it's just a written out repeat. The last one, however, we are going to add essentially a grace note, D, before the C. And it's a big fancy word. We call it an appoggiatura, which literally means to lean. but it is going to help get us into that trill. And that's what that trill would sound like. If you don't feel comfortable adding these, you don't need to. They're not written in. But if you want to add them in, I definitely encourage it. It is not going to take away at all. So without further ado, I will go ahead and play the Sarabande. And with that, we've made it through all of the etudes for the Set 2 Arkansas JH All-Region Etudes. If you would like to have some more insight on how to practice your scales, look down below and you will find a link to my Set 1 video, which has all the information you'll need about working on your scales. Happy practicing and good luck with your audition!